Hey, everybody, welcome back to season 2 of the Effort Over Results podcast, where we are focusing on one big question. How do we raise resilient, confident young people in a world that often rewards comfort more than challenge? Today's guest brings a powerful perspective on strength, both physical and mental. Zoe Thompson is a former UK police officer who spent 2 decades working in high pressure environments before transforming her life and becoming one of Britain's strongest women in competitive strongwoman events. But her story isn't just about lifting heavy weights, it's about discipline, identity, resilience, and the mindset required to push through discomfort. All lessons that matter not just for athletes, but for parents, coaches, and anyone trying to help the next generation grow stronger. Zoe, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back. I loved our first conversation, so I'm looking forward to talking things through again today.
Excellent. I always look back at my roster of guests that I've had over the last year and a half, and I believe I think you were in my first 10 episodes, and now this would be episode 70, which is so nice to have you back at this time because I think our technology is a little bit better, our setup's a little bit better, and it's a new season of talking about something a little bit different, but still focusing on effort over results. And I definitely wanted to have you back on because of your background, both in policing and in strong woman, but also as a mother. And we're going to talk about that
Mhm.
today. So I want to know, let's talk. I always like to go back, the backstory of our guests. So before policing, before strong woman competitions, let's talk about your childhood growing up because when people, see the surface of, what you've accomplished in your life, once again, policing, strong woman, and what you're doing now in coaching, it's like, I wonder what really inspired her, what really influenced her growing up. So let's talk about your childhood a little bit. And who are the people growing up that really inspired you, that motivated you, and why?
Great question. Uh, I'm not, I grew up yeah, I've got a younger sister, grew up with mum and dad. Parents divorced when I was in my early teens and then grew up with my mum and stepdad in the later years. It's hard to kind of really think what those pivotal moments were, isn't it? When you look back on it, I think I was really lucky that I had a lot of role models in and around. I did lots of after school activities, youth groups, sports clubs. And I think just that exposure to lots of different people really helped broaden that perspective at a really young age. I went to a very diverse school. So then I had sports clubs and I went to a church club and had lots of different activities. I was in brownies and guides and I think just being exposed to lots of different people with lots of different world viewpoints and different approaches, I think really was the probably one of the key differences of just being very open-minded at quite a young age of there's lots of different ways of doing things and lots of different people have got lots of different ideas about what good looks like and how to show up in the world. And yeah, I think there's no real standout individual. I think I just was very lucky. I was very lucky. And I think we'll probably talk about this later on. I think the absence of youth clubs and those fun activities, not just competitive activities, I think just really broadened my world and widened that perspective. And I think that lots of people who had an impact, not necessarily one individual, I think.
Yeah, I love what you said about being involved in, many different areas, sports, church, different clubs for kids. And I think that that is something, and maybe I'm just a bit out of touch, but I remember when I was a child, back in the 1900s, in the 1970s and early 80s, it was, yeah, I was at,
Mhm.
church youth group on Sunday nights. I was going to, sort of a gymnastic type, rough and tumble sort of club, a couple evenings a week. I was part of, a book club. And it was good because that's what your parents wanted you to do because there was nothing else to do.
Mhm.
And it was like, get involved in as many things just so you can get A, get out of your parents' hair for a few hours a night, but B, just so you get exposed to so many different
Mm.
types of people and ways of learning and figuring out how your body works when it comes to athletics and all of that. And I love hearing that. And I think, you know, kids are being too specialized these days. I don't think that's even I think they are. They're being expected, and a lot of that has to do with the pay to play model. Parents are investing thousands of dollars for their kids to be involved in sports, but then being told you can only play one sport because you've committed to this much money. So I love to hear your background was very diverse and probably exposed to many diverse cultures as well within that. So when you were growing up, were you naturally confident, or was that something you had to build when you look back? And I know it's tough to think back that far, but it's like, was confidence just something that you just naturally had?
I think if you were to ask my parents, they'd probably tell you it was it was there early on. And I think also those what people would describe as natural leadership behaviors, natural leadership ways, I think probably were quite early on. I mean, I'm an Aries, and they say that that's quite a typical Aries trait. So I'm not big into a lot of the astrology signs, but I do know when I look at the description of an Aries, I am definitely a strong Aries. Like, it's that determination, that drive, that the and confidence is in there as well. And I think I would certainly encouraged by both parents to just give it a go, do your best, give it a go. And I think that that probably went a long way. There wasn't a lot, I know you talk about, the effort over results.
Mm,
I didn't get from parents very much focus on the results. It was always about the effort, and it was the effort that you were put in. That was always the conversations around that were always about just go and have a go and try. And as long as we can see that you're trying, that's what we're looking for. So I think there's a part of that that helped with the confidence because you can't fail if it's about effort. There's much more in your control, much more what you can control and what you can influence is around effort. You can influence the results, but you can't control the results. So I think that probably helped with that confidence of, just go and try. And
mhm. I amount what you just said to action builds confidence. Not just talking about it, not just saying affirmations, like literally going out, trying, failing, succeeding, whatever it is,
Mhm.
you learn from those things, right?
Yeah.
You learn from just doing and figuring it out. And that's really where that effort piece comes in. And I love that you said that your parents just were like, go have a go, like just try it and see what happens. And to be honest, Zoe, I think most parents these days are like that and they want to
Mhm.
just be able to say that. I think it's the culture of sport and competition that has changed the way parents think to no fault of their own. They just have gotten caught up in the "we need results for my child to stay at the same level as their
Absolutely.
peers." Or if they want to do competitive basketball sport, whatever sport it is, to rise to the top, the commitment is that much higher and you need to produce results. And I've had a few guests on the show in the last few weeks that talk about, we really shouldn't even be keeping score until the age of 12.
Mm.
These kids should not be being ranked. The Olympics just finished and we talked about there was a lot of postings about how Norway, as a small country, 6 million people, has far more medals and gold medals than the United States of 350 million people. Americans will say it's because it's a winter sport, but a lot of it has to do with the Norwegian model and the Scandinavian model, which is just they don't keep score. There's no such thing as competition when the kids, up until the age of, I think, 13, and they just enjoy it for what it
Mm.
is. And it sounds like that's the background you had. That's the background that I had. So let's talk about, grit. And once again, that's another term that kind of gets tossed around a little too much lately. But I want to talk about what you think grit truly is. And looking back, were there any one or two experiences that stand out that kind of grizzled you, kind of gave you a little bit of that edge to be able to push through things, to accept challenges head on? So what does grit mean to you?
The words that popped into my mind is that digging deep and
Mm,
pushing through the discomfort. I mean, that goes into sport and life, doesn't it? Of when it gets uncomfortable, it's naturally we want to retreat back into that comfort zone and back into that safe space. But I think there's an element of focusing on what's on the other side of that discomfort and pushing through. And I think that from, I can see myself as a child kind of digging in. And I'm God forbid you told me I couldn't do something. It's like, okay, now I'm really going to have to do it to show you. And I don't know where that came from. I don't think that's a learned behavior from parents. I think that maybe that's just something that has always been there. But grit is, for me, it is the grit of the teeth. It's digging your heels in, and it's like, okay, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be a challenge, but I want what's on the other side of this way more than the safety of where I am right now. And I think there's definitely a pattern of my life around that, whether we're talking sport, whether we're talking life in general, or we're talking about me professionally, that there's definitely something in my wiring that says, no, we're gonna do this. I don't know how we're gonna do this, but we're gonna do this because I want what's on the other side of this. And the discomfort is only ever going to be temporary. So I'm just going to dig deep and push through. I'll probably whine and moan about it the entire
Yeah.
time, but I'm still gonna get it done.
Yeah, and I love what you said about of just getting it done because that goes back to, the effort side of things. I think
Mm.
it takes a little bit of courage to take that first step. That's the hardest part is starting, right? Then the grit has to kick in terms of, you're going to get knocked down. And I say that figuratively or maybe even literally. And you have to push past that, knowing that that's not a failure. That's something you learn from.
Mm.
And so digging down, digging deep and that's mentally and physically, right? And we're going to talk about that when it comes to, weightlifting and the competitions. But let's go back to now when you entered the police force, because we talked about your personality a little bit and kind of stubborn. It's like, don't tell me I can't do something. What was the motivation to go into the police force at a young age too? I believe it was just
Mm.
18. It's such an intense environment, and once again, culturally, you're in the UK, we're here in Canada. But what drew you to that? What drew you to policing?
So both my parents were police officers. They met as cadets. My mum's dad was also in the job as well. So I grew up hearing the stories, and I think the stories, that excitement around it was certainly one part. I also knew I didn't want a 9 to 5 sitting at a desk, that I didn't feel that I needed to see impact to make a difference. That was definitely a big part of it. I wanted something that was different. I wanted something that was challenging, and I wanted something that, yeah, I mean, even back then, I wanted something that was outside of my comfort zone. But making a difference, creating that impact was definitely a big part of it. But yeah, I didn't want a 9 to 5 that was the same. I did actually look at the Navy for a little while, and then I realized that actually the sea terrifies me, and so the thought of being stuck
Me
out
too.
there for months on end, were that just, but it was the dynamic of the forces, the teamwork, the pressure, the uncertainty, that all I like the sound of. So the police was probably a safer option and didn't involve the sea. But it was definitely that there were the impact, making a difference, that uncertainty, challenge, pressure was all wrapped up in there for sure.
What environment did you find to be more intense and pressure filled? Was it policing or was it going into weightlifting and strongwoman competitions? Which one was more intense?
It's a great question. I think both intense, but for different reasons. I think with strong women, it's an individual sport. So the pressure to succeed is very much on you. And you've got a very small amount of time to do what's needed to do. And there's not a lot of room to make a mistake. Most of the events are they're either timed or it's pick it up and put it back down again, and you get one go at it. So there's not a lot of room for mistakes. Everything in your training lines you up for those events. But there's a lot more that you can control. So you know what those events are. You train for those events. You know what's happening in terms of mindset, preparation, visualization. you know what's going to happen. The environment itself is very controlled. Whereas in a police environment, you're dealing with people, and no two people deal with things in the same way. And so there's a different kind of pressure because there's a lot of uncertainty. And you can say and do the same things with two different people and have two different outcomes. And also, a lot of the roles that I worked in, I was working and speaking to victims, witnesses, offenders. So there's a human at the other end of it. So if you make a mistake, the significance of that and the impact of that can be pretty, can be significant. So different pressure, a lot more uncertainty in the police world, a lot more control in the sports world, but actually both compare. And a lot of the work that I do now will bring the mindset and the consistency and the discipline from both worlds. And there's a lot of overlap between a sporting world and a professional world and dealing with things under pressure. And so it's quite nice sometimes to cross the two over to talk about things in a different way. So yeah, two very different pressures, different impact. Sport is more controllable. People, there's that uncertainty, but I loved both. And interestingly, I found when, as you said, I was 18 when I first started, so I learned very quickly to control my reaction and be able to respond. So staying calm under that pressure, and so in a police environment, that was a huge strength for me because I could stand there and somebody could be shouting and screaming at me, and I would have learned over time to just calm, breathe, and use my body language, my tone, my pace and inflection to kind of diffuse and calm the situation without using words. So I would slow down the way I'm talking, take deeper breaths and watch them take the breaths with me, and physically use that mirroring energy to help calm those situations down. Huge strength in a police environment. Using that in a sports environment had the opposite effect because I lost the adrenaline and I lost that kind of sports anxiety, sports pressure that you need that gives you that little extra oomph on competition day. People used to walk around at comps and say, "Oh my God, you're so calm. How do you do it?" And I'm like, the guys that I would train with, people like, "Come on," and like slapping me on the back and trying to get me fired up because the minute mentally I could feel that pressure, I would just go into this super calm state. And so in one environment, it was a huge strength. And then in another environment, it wasn't working for me at all.
Did the two careers ever overlap? Was there an overlap between, let's say, towards the end of your police career and then going into strongwoman?
Yeah. So the last couple of years that I was in the police, I was also competing. So part of my decision to step away from Strong Woman was because I was coming out of policing, starting the business. My son was just about to start his exam period. And so when I realized that actually I wasn't going to get sick pay if I got injured and there was a lot more responsibility on my shoulders and I needed to prioritize parenting and earning money from being self-employed, that the priorities shifted. And so it was the last couple of years in policing. So senior leadership by day and strong woman evenings and weekends.
So was there ever any mental conflict? Because I love how you said, in policing, more cerebral, more trying to calm people down, using different, voice inflections just to diffuse a situation. Whereas in Strong Woman, it's people yelling at you, slapping you on the back, and getting you ready to do the biggest lift of your life, right? Was there ever any conflict there, or maybe one was a release from the other? I would suspect. What did you think?
Yeah, I think one was definitely a release from the other. I found that, again, that, you talk about the grit and that resilience. I found that the more I trained and the more I pushed myself out of my comfort zone in a training environment, the more I started to look at different work scenarios differently and looking at them in less of a threat, less intimidating, and people's aggression in that work environment became they just looked different. And I think there was an element for me, especially in my early days of training, that the more I pushed, and the more I achieved, and the more I thought, well, hang on a minute, if I can do that there, then I can speak up in a meeting and I can challenge this and that confidence definitely overlapped. So as my confidence increased in one environment, it definitely transferred over into the other, and vice versa. Like the more I achieved in the workplace, the more personally I could feel that inner belief start to shift. And that also then translated into the gym, because we know strength training is a huge amount of belief. In addition to being the physical strength, you have to believe that that weight is going to move before you even touch it. So yeah,
Mhm.
definitely transferred over.
So what was the motivation to go into strongwoman? Like, I'm assuming there was a certain amount of physical activity and a level of physical readiness that you had to have to be a police officer. Like, I know here in Canada, we call it the POPAT. It's the police officer physical activity test. And they probably had a similar test to get into the force there. But I mean, you played a lot of sports when you were younger. So where did the motivation come to going into lifting heavy things and putting them
Mm.
down? And, did it come from the physical activity of being a police officer, or was it just, you know what? I'm gonna try this. What was the motivation there?
I mean, the two were separate. So yeah, I was sporty as a child. Then when I got into my 20s and had my son, I gained a huge amount of weight, just purely from being less active. So then when I got into my late 20s, early 30s, made the decision, like, hey, I don't want to be this size. I don't feel great. And made the decision to get back into training. I had lost the weight, but was using a lot of cardio to keep it off. When I met a personal trainer, he said, you need to get into the weight section. If you want to keep the weight off, you want to build your metabolism. And actually, as a woman, the strength training is going to be really important for you. And he offered me a session to teach me how to use the weights. And that's was really where things started to change. Got on really well. I loved strength training right from the very beginning. And like I said, it was a very different sport. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, so it was nice to do something that was a little bit different. And actually, that's when somebody else who was using the same personal trainer had said, there's an open day for women to have a look at strong women equipment. Will you come down with me? And so I said yes to that, and it just massively snowballed. I was in a phase of my life where I my confidence had definitely dipped through personal circumstance. Professionally, I was doing really, really well. Personally, was just lacking that confidence a little bit. And so had challenged myself to start saying yes to things. So it's the only way I'm going to pick things back up is to challenge myself to say yes. And I always talk to people about courage coming before confidence. That if you want to increase your confidence, you have to take action. You have to put evidence into your brain that says, I can do this, that you've got the resources, you've got the transferable skills. And that doesn't happen by sitting there and not doing anything about it. And so I kind of challenged myself to say yes to things. I had a crazy 12 months, did a skydive, and I did all of these crazy challenges where people were like, oh, I'm doing this. Do you fancy doing it? And whereas normally I would have gone, nah, that's not really for me. I was like, okay, yes. And that's where the strong woman came in. The girl at the gym said, will you come down with me? And I was like, okay, yeah. Went down, played on the equipment. And as we were leaving, the gym owner said, I'm going to do a women's competition for the first time. It would be great if you girls sign up. And I was like, okay, yes. We'll worry about it. We'll worry about it later. I did a tough mudder. I did all of these crazy things, but that's where strong women came. And then in my first competition, I came fifth, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm all right at this. And then that led to another competition, that led to another competition, and then my personal trainer said, well, you're pretty strong in the local group. Why don't you give a regional competition a go? Okay, yes. So I went for a regional comp. That qualified me for England, and nobody was more surprised than I was. I was like, how am I going to a national competition? I remember ringing him driving back, my mate that had come with me, and she was driving, and I'm calling him from the passenger seat and going, I'm going to England's Strongest Woman. I need a training plan. Like, I'm not quite sure what's happened here. and then from England's to Brits, from Brits to Europe. So I think it's saying yes, and I think it's also well, let's see what we can do. We don't. So with Strong Woman, you only get the events about 6 weeks out, so you have to train for everything all of the time. So again, totally appeals to me because it's variety. It's not all of the same stuff. It's an all rounder, and then you get 6 weeks where you get the events released, the weights are released, and you're like, oh God, right, okay, we got to put some work in. And that's it then. You just kind of get into that focus mode, and then it becomes you versus you. And it's right, let's lock in and see what we can do. And I loved that. I loved the challenge of, well, we're starting from here and this is the goal in the next 6 weeks, and let's see what happens.
Think, Zoe, I think the message that you just sent to everybody out there listening was just try it. Say yes to things. You don't know where it's going to land. And it went from, going into a gym and doing, trying to lose the weight from childbirth, and then, it's like, oh, you should try to lift some weights just to try to, bring your metabolism up, and that transformed into someone who's saying, hey, we're having a competition, you want to come and try, to you being, Britain's strongest woman. Um, we don't know where life will lead us, but we do know where life will lead us if we just sit on a couch every day, all day, right? Like
Hmm.
it is those varied experiences, those varied conversations that you have with people, the willingness, and you said it, you repeated exactly what I said earlier. Action builds confidence. You don't gain confidence by telling yourself that I'm confident. You actually have to have failed. In fact, failure is
Hmm.
probably one of the best confidence builders, as long as you don't give up
Hmm.
in continuing to try, to try, to try, to try, and keep going at it, regardless of what it is. So I love the message you sent the audience. So let's switch to what the theme of this season is all about, and it's really about raising, strong, confident young kids. And I will get back to your career in Strong Woman in a second, but you have a son. You said he's 23, exact same age as
Hmm.
my son, so we can relate there. What type of parent were you, let's say, compared to the way your parents parented you? Because I love talking about generational differences and how, the baby boomer parents, the ones that were born in the 30s and early 40s, had the millennials. How did you raise your son in it, like where you are? Because you were already, I believe you were already in policing. Had you already started strong woman competitions when you had your son, or did that come after?
No, that came after. So he was just coming up to, well, not quite in his teens. He would have been 11 or 12 when
When
I
you started
started
with
doing
it.
the strong woman. Yeah.
What did that feel like for him? Like, if I were to ask him today, what do you think about your mom going into strong woman competitions?
I think so. He didn't come to a competition until I competed at Britain's. So up until that point, he was aware I was going off training, but that was very normal, because I was in the gym. Well, I mean, I started running when he would ride a bike. So like that's, and then I got into the gym when he was at school. So me going off to the gym was normal. Me competing, not so much. So I don't think it was really until he came to the competition that he really kind of saw it for what it was. Um, yeah, I think it's funny because we obviously have conversations about it now, and there's pictures up around the house when his mates come round like, oh, your mum's hench, and like it's like that. I think there's an element where he's really proud, and like there's a sense of respect and admiration over being able to achieve that, and then there's also a sense of, that's your mum and your mum's got biceps and lifting stuff. So on the whole, it was all very positive, and I think at that same time he was just really getting into basketball as well. So I think there was an element where it was nice. We had that kind of shared interest of training and focusing on his games and my competitions, and having those conversations around eating well and going training even when we didn't feel like it. And he would tell me to, get up and get going in the same way that I would tell him to get up and get going. So I think it was nice for us to have, although we were in very different sports, we had that commonality at that time, where actually for a lot of parents and their kids, there's a gap there. So I think it really brought us together at that time with lots of like those shared experiences. And then I would go and watch his games and he would then come and watch me compete. So yeah, it kind of worked out well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know as I in the past few years, as we've been developing effort over results, the philosophy at least, it really is born from the mistakes I feel I made in raising my children.
Mhm.
I still feel I was a good father. I would like I would take a bullet for my kids, but I feel like the messaging to them, and I think all Gen X parents feel this, the messaging that we were told as young parents in the early 2000s was tell your kids how great they are. Tell them how athletic and talented and smart and handsome and beautiful they are, even if they're not, and give them participation medals, make them feel like, they're special, even if they're not, right? And I'm okay with building a child's confidence, but what I didn't like about that, and we just succumbed to it as we were young parents, right? Everybody was, is that I believe that we kind of raised a generation of kids, Gen Z, that did lack resilience and grit and confidence because they were being told one thing,
Mhm.
but the real world out there wasn't confirming that for them. And then they're like, well, mom and dad tell me I'm great and I'm smart and I'm athletic talented, but I'm not showing that out in public and in school and on the sports pitch. What's going on here, right? And then their self-worth drops and everything. So
Mm.
getting back to parenting mistakes, there's no perfect parent. Everybody makes mistakes as a parent. You get frustrated, you have bad days and all that. How did that turn into what kind of parent were you? Like, were you a parent that was like we were talking about, like, about it's just about effort, it's just about trying just to go have a go, or was it a little more competitive? Like, how would you describe your parenting style? How would your son describe your parenting style?
That's a good
Two
question.
different.
He's the other side of the door, so I'll ask him afterwards and see what he says. I would say that I definitely had a very coaching approach, which certainly was very different to my parents. And I remember, I mean, I was a young parent, so I was 22, 23 when I had him. So it's really interesting that he's at that age now. And I look at him and I think, how was I, how was I a parent at this age and taking on that responsibility? And also made me realize how little I did actually know. And I know I thought a lot, but I thought I knew it all, but actually really didn't. So I definitely took a more coaching approach. Ownership and responsibility was really important, that he had ownership and responsibility for his actions. So I remember, we've always been pretty good at talking things through. He is also an Aries, so we're both kind of we can be quite fiery. So I found that actually quite early on, just letting go of having the last word sometimes was quite difficult, but just being okay with walking away and then coming back and talking it through, but never taking the ownership and responsibility off of him and making sure that he kept hold of that. So I remember lots of conversations. Okay, well, you did this. So now what are your options to make it better, make it right, or do differently next time? And doing that at an age where he was able to sit there and recognize that actions have consequences and that, effort and results and all of the positives and the negatives, and not taking things off of him, but sitting with him and helping him to work out how to work his way through it. So, if he would have a bad game, I would like to think that I supported, but I didn't try to make him feel better, because that's, for me, was he needs to learn how to make himself feel better. He needs to learn how to work it through when there's a loss, because ultimately I can't, when he's 23 and sitting as a professional, I can't, mum can't come down and sit on the bench and give him a big hug and a kiss on the forehead and tell him everything's going to be okay. Like, at some point, he's got to learn to be able to do that. And I think sport is a great way where kids are in those situations without parents and different role models that model different behaviors. But for me, it was not taking the ownership and responsibility off of him. And rather than take the pain, or try and take things away from him to make life easier, sit with him and help him to put the tools in the toolbox to be able to work it through. And I my parents definitely didn't think that that was the way to do it. And there were a few times at family events where I'd be like, no, leave him. He needs to work out how, like, he can throw himself on the floor, but he's got to learn how to self-regulate, as we call it now. But he's got to learn how to calm himself down. He's got to learn how to do that. And yeah, definitely some side eyes from family members, but yeah, he's turned out okay. So whether he tells you that was a good thing or not, I don't know. But at 12, he went overseas to play in a basketball tournament with kids that were older than him, because I knew that he would be okay, because he had the tools in the toolbox to be able to, if it was a bad game over there, I can't travel over to Eastern Europe to go and give him a hug, because I can talk to him and I can help him to work his way through it. But not taking things off him was the biggest thing, I think.
I had a parenting expert on a couple months ago that talked about being the guide on the side, and someone who is the guardrails, so the child doesn't go off the rails, but is there to provide them, like you said, with the tools, with some knowledge, but allowing them to take the tools and decide how they want to use them, and how do they decide to react when they've lost something, failed, or so-called failed at something, or they're just throwing a tantrum on the floor. Like, how are we gonna respond to this? And I think I learned a lot from that. And I've learned more. And maybe this is why we become better grandparents than parents, because I've learned more in my 50s about
Mhm.
parenting than I ever did in my 20s to 50s, in being a parent. Uh, because it's an ongoing job. You're making mistakes. Some days you have some successes with raising your kids, but in the end, you really just want them to the goal is for them to become independent enough to be able to go out and be on their own. That's really
Mhm.
what we want for them. Can they pay their bills? Can they, have meaningful employment? Can they find someone else now that they are building a life with and they feel they're comfortable with, and they're just being good citizens? And so that's all we want. I don't think anybody says my kid's going to be, an EPL soccer player right out of the womb, but it's important that we just give them that opportunity to fall down,
Mhm.
figuratively and literally, bump their heads and figure it out for themselves. So when you became a mother, you were in the police force, then Strong Woman came afterwards. I imagine those two environments influenced you as a mother. What I would like to know is, did being a mother influence those two environments? Like, did it change the way you saw the world? Did it change the way you police? Did it change the way you approach strong woman competitions when you became a mother?
No. I don't. If it did, I don't know that I was consciously aware of it. I mean, I know it was a juggle for logistics of raising a child and working shifts and having those like two levels of responsibility. But I don't know. I think you learn different skills as a parent, don't you? Which I think naturally you probably take into work with you. And I think I probably learned skills in the work that, again, that calm under pressure. So, when he's throwing himself around which he hasn't done for a very long time, I should say, for the
This is
record. This is not something that's still going on. But, as a toddler, when he's throwing himself on the floor in the supermarket and everyone's judging you as a parent, that ability to just take some deep breaths and not lose it at that time probably transferred over, I would imagine. So yeah, yeah, I mean, it all goes in the toolbox, isn't it? I don't know that you always consciously think about where those tools came from. You just look at the tools that you've got and apply them in different circumstances. I think it makes sense that they would have transferred over. I don't know that I consciously saw a difference, if that makes sense. But I think I mean, a lot of it all happened at the same time. I mean, I'd started the police at 18, was a parent at 22. As I went into, I mean, when did I go into leadership? So I was pregnant when I went into leadership. So actually, most of my leadership journey and motherhood journey kind of go hand in hand. So I was probably evolving as a
Mm.
human on both of those levels at the same time. And as I was promoted in work, and those responsibilities kind of got bigger and heavier. You know, he would go through his different stages of life, and then you get teens, senior leadership, and strong women all at the same time. So
Wow.
we all of the tools.
I imagine there was some crossover between, especially on the leadership side of things, but even as I wish my kids had been able to see me play football because I had
Mm,
retired by the time they were born. But I can't imagine being in still in competitive forum, whether it be in strongwoman or professional sports or what have you, and having your kids there watching you. I imagine that might have been a bit of a motivation for you, is once again just to keep showing my son that it's
mm,
not about showing my son how I win competitions. It's about showing my son that I have the discipline and there's consistent effort every day and that things aren't just handed to you. So I love that side of things. So this is what I want to talk about now, Zoe, is that, and I go back to my generational comment about how Gen Z kids have been, for the most part, as a generation, protected from hardship. I know here in North America, in the States, they call it helicopter parenting, as in Canada,
mhm,
we call it snow plowing. I don't know what they call it in the UK, but basically, we kind of cleared the way for our kids. We talked to their coaches, we talked to their teachers, we talked to their bosses when they were younger about, how to handle my child, and we protected them too much. I did it too. So I'm putting my hand
mhm.
up on that one. Now that we are the wise old owls, how do we tell this generation of parents, which would be, millennials and even potentially some Gen Zs, young Gen Zs, how do we get them to see those mistakes that we made and to raise their kids in a different way and protecting them from hardship?
Mm.
Because hardship isn't a bad thing. What would you tell a young parent today on, one good parenting tip?
For me, it's good intentions with unintended consequences. That's ultimately what it is. I see it through the leadership coaching as much as I see it with parenting. We get leaders who step in and try and protect their teams, but then they're ultimately disempowering them in the process. And so it's the same in parenting. If we want a well rounded human, the autonomy is really important. Their confidence in their ability is really important. And them recognizing what they contribute for themselves and for the wider world is really important. And every time we step in as a parent and fix it for them, we're rescuing. So I love the dreaded drama triangle. I think that's such a great way to explain, whether it's workplace or as a parent, that every time you step in and rescue, you're disempowering and you're de-skilling. And that, whether you do that in leadership or whether you do that as a parent, it's very good intentions. I totally get where you're coming from. We do it because we don't want our children to feel pain. We don't want them to be upset. But if we step in and rescue, we're not helping them to put the tools in their toolbox to be able to deal with these things themselves. And so, whilst it's well intentioned, it's not the kindness that we think it is. And actually, sometimes the kindness is sitting next to them while they go through that pain and that discomfort, and helping them to work out what works for them. Because the other thing is, they're not us. I know as parents, we say they're a mini version of us, and they are, but they're a mini blended version of two of us. So what works for me is not necessarily going to work for him, in the same way that what works for his dad is not necessarily going to work for him, because he's the blend of two people. He's also his own person. And so he has to work out what works for him, and he has to work out who he wants to be and how he wants to show up in this world. And we can only guide that. We can teach from our own experiences, and then at some point we have to hands off and let them work it out. And we can do that at a distance. We're still there, but ultimately they have to learn how to work these things out for themselves. Otherwise we're de-skilling them. And that's, I think, certainly from conversations that I have and people that I work with, again, workplace and parenting, it goes hand in hand, is that it's not that they don't want to, it's that they've not learned how to, because somebody stepped in and did it for them. And that's, again, good intentions, good intentions, unintended consequences.
I think the best way to describe it, and I mentioned guide on the side earlier, is that if we provide a psychologically safe environment for our kids or anyone we're leading, but let's stick with parenting. If we provide that psychologically safe environment for our kids where they know they are protected, but not to the extent of being, having a parent that's helicoptering snow plowing, but they know that they can take risks. They can
Mhm.
try new things. They're not going to be chastised or judged for failing or making a mistake. And I think that is the most important environment we can provide for anybody that we lead. Anyone that's within our circle of influence is you want people when they are around you to feel psychologically safe. And I talk about this in my public speaking in that it doesn't matter if you are a coach of a team, a teacher in a classroom, a parent of your own child and family, or an employer with employees, those children, students, athletes, and employees, when they walk through the door, they want to know that they are safe. And I don't just mean safe from physical harm. I mean literally just psychologically safe that they feel the freedom to be who they are, genuine, authentically who they are, to try new things, to be able to fail at something and not lose your love. Uh, and I love that you said that because I think, when you talk about even in policing, when you walk into a situation, and once again, every situation is different. But it sounded to me like you were trying to immediately de-escalate the situation and provide that psychologically safe environment for, the victim or whoever it is in the situation to feel like they can talk, to feel like they're protected, to feel like they can just relax and be able to tell the story, right? Same thing with our kids. So my question, Zoe, is this is how do I explain it? I think leadership goes across all arenas.
Mhm.
Parenting, coaching, teaching, employing, whatever. Anywhere where you're trying to grow other people, you're a leader. I think you can be a leader even if you aren't trying to grow other people. I don't think
Absolutely.
leadership is a title, it's not a status, it's
Mhm.
not up and down. So I want to get this answer from you. What does leadership mean in being a parent? How are
I don't
parents
I
leaders?
I don't know that it's that dissimilar from being a leader in a workplace. You're there to get the best out of your team, for them to be high performers and reach their full potential. Not dissimilar to parenting. And I think, the autonomy is there, the self efficacy is there, the self leadership, teaching them that self leadership is also there. I think do believe the two go hand in hand. And, in the same way that the analogy I often use with clients is that, if we always tie our children's shoelaces, then at 23, they still need us to tie their shoelaces. In the same way as in leadership, if you always answer the question and provide them with a solution, they're always going to come to you for the answer and the solution. So, yes, it's uncomfortable in the moment for them because it's new and it's different and it's outside of their comfort zone. But what they're learning to do in that moment is help to ask different questions for different answers, help them to be good decision makers and assess the situation and look at what's the outcome that they're looking for. You're teaching them to respond differently. You're teaching them life skills, work skills. I do think they go hand in hand. And I think in the same way that you get micromanagers in leaderships, you get your helicopter. I think there's the term we use helicopter parent here. We also use mollycoddle,
Yeah.
just always fixing. So it's the same thing, isn't it? It's micromanaging or it's helicopter parenting or just getting too involved. And I've always said to them, like, who do you need to go and talk to? Okay, what is it that you want to say? What questions do you want to ask them? I'll talk him through what conversation he's going to have so he can then go and have that conversation. I'm not having that conversation for him. He's got to learn to have those conversations. They're different conversations now to what they were when he was 10, but the dynamic is still the same in the same way in leadership. Okay, what would you like to do? What options are available to you? What have you considered? What have you taken off the table? How do you want to make that decision? How do you want to take it forward? You're teaching them those skills so they don't need to keep coming back to you.
Yeah. I I want to say I was hoping you would give me that answer because that's exactly how I feel that leadership is everywhere. I think there's one general question that I learned back when I owned my company to ask my employees, but now I use it everywhere. It's, well, what would you do in this situation? I just ask them, how would you handle this?
Mhm,
What are your thoughts about how this should go? And know, and then just let them do it.
mhm,
Once again, guide on the side as long as it's not crazy and wild. I mean, and it's going to get them hurt. But ultimately, it's really, what would you do in this situation? Okay, go ahead,
yeah,
try that. Let's see what happens. You're going to learn from that. And once again, Zoe, that took me 40 plus years to finally get someone to
mhm,
tell me that that is a better way to lead and teach and coach than it is to do it for them or even show them necessarily. I
yeah.
think sometimes they need to try it and fail and then you kind of work them through it. So I love what you said about that, which leads me beautifully into my sort of wrap up question here, in that if you could describe leadership is in one word, leadership is dot 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 in one word, what is leadership?
One words are always terrible for me. I'm gonna go with the first one that came to my mind, and that was empowering.
Okay. Tell me more.
And from both, so now I'm thinking it through as I've said it, but that was the word that jumped to my mind when you said leadership is
That's
empowering. I think it's empowering. If you are leading well, it feels empowering because you see the impact that you're having with your team and their development in the same way with parenting, but you are also empowering others. We talk in coaching, that ethos is that the person who's sitting in front of us is a resourceful person. They just don't know what questions to ask to bring those answers to the surface. And I think in parenting, it's the same. We've got resourceful young people in front of us. We just sometimes need to give them a little bit of time and space to bring those answers and those solutions to the surface in the same way that we do in leadership. Actually, if you hold space for people, they know what to do. They just sometimes they want some reassurance. Sometimes they're looking for permission, but if you give them that space, they know. They just need a safe space, like you said. The guide on the side, I think, is a lovely expression to have that, like just knowing that they're not in it on their own. And I think again, leading and parenting exactly the same. My boy knows I've got his back 100%. I'm not going to jump in and rescue, but
mhm.
he knows that I'm right here, and I've got
Yeah,
his back 100%.
yeah.
But I'm also not going to fix it for him. And
You
that
know
should
what?
be the same in leadership. You know that your leader's got your
Yes.
back, but they're also not going to dive in, roll up their sleeves, and fix it because that's disempowering.
Yeah. They're protecting you in a different way. They're not
Hmm.
they're not they're not protecting you from the slings and arrows of, misfortune. They are protecting you in such a way to allow you that autonomy to make your own decisions, to try things out. So they are, the guide on the side, the person that is there that provides that psychologically safe environment. When you said empowerment, it to me, I heard this, it was on LinkedIn. It was basically leadership is influence. And I think those two words go hand in hand. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. It's influence. You are an influence on that person because they feel safe around you. They follow your lead even if they don't have to, right? That was another one that I heard that was beautiful. It's like, if people follow you as a leader when they don't have to, meaning they're not getting paid to, they're not part of a group that where it's requirement, like they could leave if they want, that speaks a lot about influence. And then
Hmm.
it's also the influence that they go on to have with others. And that's what I hope for my children, is that they are learning now from what I'm doing now, so that when they lead their children, kids that they coach, maybe they become teachers, even in employment, how they influence others and how others feel around
Hmm.
them. So
Yeah.
that was beautiful. Empowerment's awesome. I think that's a great example of what leadership is. Let's start to wrap things up, Zoe. I want to ask a couple of fun questions because I know there's my audience is going to wonder, because we talked about being Britain's strongest woman and then going on to European championships. Let's talk about some actual statistics, because when people go, well, how strong is she? Are there
Ah.
any? Are there any? Are there any? Like, once again, everyone's like, hey, how much you bench? How much you squat? Are there any particular weights, lifts that you've done that you're particularly proud of, or maybe have set records, like something what do you think is the most impressive feat that you've pulled
Okay.
off in strong woman?
So what I will say is I never won a competition.
Okay.
I never won an event, but I was a good all-rounder. So I always was in the top 3 of
Yeah.
every event, which always positioned me well to be able to podium. So I think there's a lesson there. You don't need to be the best at everything to be good at what you do. But I think most proud was, so it was Europe's Strongest Woman. So my son was there, and we had a car deadlift in front of Magnus v. Magnuson, who was the judge.
Hey,
And I think I picked the car up and put it down 23 times. When I do talks in schools, we get the kids to guess how many times I can pick up the car, and then we play the video and get them all to count along. So I think that's probably one of the prouder moments.
how heavy was the car? What did they weigh it at as far as the deadlift goes?
I have no idea, but I do remember them putting extra beer barrels in the car because they didn't think it was heavy enough. And actually, when I think I was second to go, and I remember Magnus v. Magnuson saying we need to put more weight in it, and it was like, well, we can't because competitors have already been. So yeah, I mean, it was heavy. It was heavy. You've only got to look at the pictures and the faces that I'm pulling to know that it was heavy. But yeah, that was. I mean, it's such a iconic picture, isn't it? And
Are there
the
videos out there? Like, can I go to YouTube and find videos of you lifting?
Yeah, there's a mini documentary that Red Bull did. So they followed me between, so again, saying yes. Somebody posted that Red Bull were looking for some people to follow between Britain's and Europe's. So I said yes. And I thought they were following a few of us and then we're putting the documentary together. And as it happened, it was just me. So there's an 8-minute Red Bull video where it follows for the little bit of my personal story as well.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah,
I
there
love that.
is.
I need to check that out. I might even pull some screenshots from that. Let's talk about
Not
what
the
you're doing
faces though.
let's talk about what you're doing today, Zoe. You talk about being in leadership, and once again, I
Mhm.
mentioned, when I follow your Instagram account, it's like it seems like you're everywhere in Europe and even outside of Europe. What is Zoe Thompson, leadership coach, preaching today? Who are you working with? What is the message you're bringing, and what does that arena look like for you right now?
Mm. So, I mean, I've leaned back into leadership. The coaching work that I've done over the years has always been really varied. Again, I love the variety. And then halfway through last year, I made the decision to lean back into leadership, having picked up lots more tools in the toolkit from doing lots of different coaching over the years. Leadership for me pulls really well together my professional experience, then the performance element of Strong Woman, and it all comes together really nicely. In terms of the leadership development, my key focus is helping leaders to be more efficient and more effective. So we've got some great leaders out there who do a fantastic job, but they're working evenings and weekends and they're losing out on life in the process. So for me, it's leadership skills. It's everything you would expect from leadership training, leadership coaching. But the aim is to help them to be more efficient and more effective leaders so they go home on time. And then also empowering that team, building that team so they can take a week off and go and lie on a beach somewhere and not be answering questions and helping their team make decisions. Actually having a team that means they can step away from for a week and have that trust and that confidence in their team to be able to hold the fort when they're away. Like you said, I get great opportunities to work with lots of different companies and industries as well as individuals as well. So yeah, I'm loving what I'm doing.
It sounds very much like there's a book that I used with my leadership teams that I gave to them. Not my book, but a book called Your Oxygen Mask First by Kevin Lawrence. And he was actually
Mm,
just on our show a few weeks ago, blew up wildly, 75,000 views. And because
oh,
he leads in that same way. He's telling leaders, you can't be healthy, physically, mentally, spiritually healthy for your team to show up for your
mm,
team if you yourself are not feeling good, not healthy
yeah.
mentally, spiritually, physically. And he talks about, once again, that efficiency of leadership, of delegation, of getting be the dumbest person in the room, like really, like get
Mhm.
other people to do stuff for you, because too many founders, and I'm going off on a tangent, and this is okay, because too many founder type business owners, leaders of organizations who are the founders who started it, they are the worst violators of this rule, but largely because that is their child. That
Mm,
business, that organization, that company is like their child. They grew it from a little seedling, an idea, and they have a hard time letting it go. And so they burn the candle at both ends. They're working, 80-hour weeks. Even when their team could run on their own, they're
yeah.
micromanaging maybe a little bit, right? They've
Hmm.
still got their hands in everything when their team is saying, "Go away, like just go be the CEO, go be
Yeah.
the owner." And he talks about that. It's like we can't take care of others until we take care of ourselves first.
Mm,
And that's what it sounds like your messaging is. It's like you will be a
yeah.
better leader, a more efficient, effective leader by doing less.
Yes.
Right? Does that
And
sound
compress.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is people think that it's good leadership because they're staying late. It's good leadership because they're logging on at weekends to answer questions. And I think that's the message we need to get back out there is actually no. What that means is that you're always available. You're probably working more at a tactical level than a strategic level, which means you're potentially going to drop the ball on being able to drive the momentum to help give your team direction because and I love the expression being on the dance floor rather than on the balcony. And there's a lot of leaders that are down on the dance floor with their staff and they need to be on the balcony. And you need to let go. It's the same with parenting. You've got to let go and you've got to trust that you've given them the tools, that they know what they're doing, they understand your vision, they understand what good looks like, and then you've got to trust them to go and get it done. And I think that there's always that, there's a belief that it means that I'm a good leader, I'm working hard, I'm a hard worker, I'm committed. But actually, the more efficient you are, the more effective you are, the more efficient and effective your team will be, and you are going to be a better leader as a result. So that's is a very mixed message, isn't it? Of people thinking what good looks like and what do your team think good looks like? Because quite often that's not the same thing. And you're right, founders that have built a business are often the worst offenders because, like you said, but it's that not letting go of the parenting, isn't it? Of
Yep.
of actually, you're still tying the shoelace, and they're a grown man now with their own children, and you're still trying to tie the shoelaces. Like at some point, you've got to let go, and if they tie them wrong and fall over, that's okay. You'll be there to pick them up, and we go again. But yeah.
Have you ever worked with a leader, business owner who has pushed back on that and said, "This isn't about me, it's about the company and I need to be here." Like, they just don't
Mhm.
listen to the message you and I are talking about? What kind of conversation is that like?
For me, my focus then is to work on the belief that drives that. What is it
Right.
they believe is true that drives that action, that feeling, that behavior? And I've worked with someone who, and suddenly when that shift starts to happen, and the next thing I know, it's like, oh, I can't do my coaching session this week because I'm going off on holiday again. When it's like, well, now I know the team can handle it without me, then I'm fed up with the horrible UK weather and I'm going on holiday again and I'm gonna take the family with me. And I'm like, okay, this is good. This is what we want.
Yeah.
And then you speak to their manager and the managers, they're feeling empowered because they can feel proud that they've kept everything going in their absence. So there needs to be a shift in thinking, and there's a belief that drives the behavior. And if we can get to the root cause, then we can shift that and different behaviors start to come through.
So final question, just finish the sentence for me. Strong people are built through dot dot dot. How are strong people built?
Experience was the first word that came to my mind.
Yeah.
You don't learn strength through a book or podcast. You learn it by getting out there and getting messy, falling over, picking yourself back up again. And it hurts, but you know, it's it's what makes you stronger.
Where can people find you, Zoe? Let's talk about your social media platforms. Let's talk about where people could even reach out to you if they want to, but
Mhm.
what are your handles? Let's tell people where they can find you.
Everything is under zoethompson.uk. So the website's under that name. The social media handles are under that name. So if you put in Zoe Thompson UK, that should bring it up. And I'm more than happy to answer questions and have conversations with people. So feel free to reach out.
Well, Zoe, you've been an inspiration to me for the last like since we met each other back in early 2025. I've followed your journey and I love what you do and I want to thank you personally for walking me through a couple of low moments and being a leader in that sense. So thank you very much for that. Thanks for sharing your story today. I love talking about you being a mother because I know we didn't talk about that much on the last show, but this is about building and leading resilient young people like your son, like my son, and everybody out there that we're leading. So this is a story about strength. And like you said, what you said, built strong people. It's not about muscles. It's about
Mm.
resilience, responsibility, and just the courage to get out there and face challenge. Just go out there and do it. So for my audience, if you're a parent, a coach, or a mentor, business owner trying to raise resilient, confident people, please share this episode with someone who is shaping that next generation because strength isn't something we talk about, it's something we build. We'll see you next time.